They say the world is becoming more connected, but is that true for everyone? Have you ever wondered why some places seem to close their doors to certain people? What if you arrived in a new country, only to feel like an outsider the moment you stepped off the plane? In some parts of the world, Black travelers and residents face unspoken barriers. Strange looks, social exclusion, or even outright hostility. Some countries have deep-rooted biases, while others enforce silent policies that make it clear you're not welcome here. Stay with us as we uncover 10 countries where Black people aren't welcomed. Number 10. China. It's one of the most powerful countries in the world, yet for Black travelers and expats, the experience can be far from welcoming. China has a complex relationship with race, and Black people often face blatant discrimination. From being refused service in restaurants to locals taking pictures like they've spotted an alien, the treatment can range from uncomfortable to outright racist. During the pandemic, African migrants in Guangzhou were evicted from their homes, denied entry to businesses, and blamed for spreading the virus. That wasn't centuries ago, it was 2020. The problem is deeply rooted in media portrayals and historical attitudes. Chinese TV ads have infamously depicted Black people in degrading ways, reinforcing stereotypes. And if you think things are different in major cities like Beijing or Shanghai, many Black residents still report being treated with suspicion. Is it ignorance or something more? Either way, for many Black visitors, China feels more isolating than inviting. Number 9. India. With its diverse population and deep history, India might seem like an unexpected entry. But for Black people, the reality is much harsher than you'd think. Africans, particularly students from Nigeria and Sudan, have faced brutal attacks in cities like Delhi and Bangalore. In 2017, a Nigerian student was beaten by a mob, while others were accused of being criminals simply for being Black. Locals have even used the phrase Kalu, a derogatory term for dark-skinned people, without a second thought. The bias is evident in Indian society itself. Colorism runs deep, with lighter skin favored in everything from movies to marriage. This mindset extends to how Black visitors are treated, often seen as either suspicious or inferior. And if you're thinking, it's just a few incidents, ask the African students who have protested their treatment. Ask the expats who say they're stared at every time they walk down the street. India's diversity doesn't always mean inclusivity. Before we move forward, make sure to subscribe so we can keep bringing you content like this. If you think the world is an open and accepting place, you might want to stick around, because the next country will surprise you. Number 8. Russia. Ask any Black traveler about places to avoid, and this one always comes up. Russia isn't just unwelcoming, it can be downright dangerous. From Moscow to St. Petersburg, reports of racism aren't just casual ignorance, but aggressive hostility. Black residents and tourists frequently deal with racial slurs, open stares, and even physical attacks. During the 2018 FIFA World Cup, there were concerns that African and Black visitors would be targeted. And guess what? Those concerns weren't unfounded. The Russian football scene has a long, disturbing history of racism, with Black players enduring monkey chants and banana-throwing incidents. But it's not just in sports. African students and workers have been harassed on public transport, denied housing, and even attacked in the streets. And here's the real shocker. Russia still has neo-Nazi gangs that openly target people of African descent. You'd think in 2024 such groups would be a thing of the past, but no. Even Amnesty International has warned about the extreme racial violence in the country. Some say it's a cultural issue. Many Russians simply haven't interacted with Black people and hold outdated Soviet-era stereotypes. But when those stereotypes turn into real violence, it's more than just ignorance, it's hostility. Think it's just a few incidents? A 2006 study by Moscow's Human Rights Bureau found that African migrants were 21 times more likely to be attacked than any other group. Let that sink in. Would you risk visiting a place where being Black could put you in danger? Number 7. Ukraine. You'd expect things to be different in a country fighting for its survival, but Ukraine has a long-standing problem with racism, and it became impossible to ignore in 2022. Remember when the war with Russia broke out? People were scrambling to escape. But guess what? African and Indian students were denied access to trains and border crossings, while white Ukrainians were allowed through first. Videos showed border guards pushing black refugees back, telling them, "Ukraine first." The discrimination didn't start with the war. Black residents in Ukraine, especially students from Africa, have faced racism for years. Reports of people being denied jobs, ignored in stores, or treated like criminals are common. Many black students who move to cities like Kyiv and Kharkiv for education have warned others, "If you come here, expect stares, mistreatment, and outright racism." And here's the part no one talks about. Some of Ukraine's far-right groups have openly embraced white nationalist ideologies. In 2018, a black man was beaten in broad daylight in Kyiv while a crowd watched and did nothing. The attackers? Never arrested. Now don't get it twisted. There are black people living in Ukraine, and some have positive experiences. But when crisis strikes and discrimination flares up, it's clear where the priorities lie. Number 6. Italy. If you think Italy, the land of pasta, ancient ruins, and fashion, is all warm welcomes and friendly smiles, think again. Italy has a deep-rooted racism problem, and black visitors and residents have experienced it firsthand. Walk through Rome, Milan, or Naples. And if you have dark skin, expect stares. But guess what? That's the mild part. Many black immigrants, especially those from Africa, have faced outright hostility, racial slurs, and even violence. Ever heard of the blackface scandals in Italian TV? It's not just once or twice. Some of Italy's biggest TV shows have casually featured white actors painting their faces black for comedic effect. And when people call it out, Italian media shrugs it off. But the problem isn't just on TV. Italy's soccer stadiums have long been a breeding ground for racism. Black players have been spat on, called monkeys, and had bananas thrown at them, even in top leagues. And shockingly, it's not just fans. Even politicians have made racist remarks about black Italians. In 2013, Cecile Kyenge, Italy's first black government minister, was compared to an orangutan by a senator. His punishment? A slap on the wrist. And here's where it gets worse. African migrants in Italy, especially those from Libya or sub-Saharan Africa, live in some of the worst conditions imaginable. Many work under the table in illegal labor markets, earning almost nothing while facing police raids, deportation threats, and racist abuse. Ever heard of the town of Macerata? In 2018, a far-right extremist went on a shooting spree targeting black people, injuring 6. His motive? Revenge against African migrants. Yet many Italians defended him. That should tell you everything. So, is Italy still a dream vacation spot for black travelers? Maybe, if you don't mind being treated like an outsider in the country that practically invented the Renaissance. Number 5. Greece. You'd think a country known for its beautiful beaches, rich history, and tourist-friendly islands would be welcoming. But Greece has a very different story when it comes to black visitors and immigrants. If you're black and walking through Athens or Thessaloniki, don't be surprised if you get stared at like a zoo animal. Some locals have never seen a black person before and make it painfully obvious. But that's just the beginning. Racial profiling by police? Common. There have been countless reports of black people getting stopped, questioned, and even detained for no reason other than their skin color. In 2020, a shocking video surfaced of Greek police slapping and abusing a black man on the street. His crime? Simply existing. And if you think it's just an occasional incident, think again. Greece has a growing far-right movement, and groups like Golden Dawn, a neo-Nazi political party, have openly attacked black migrants. They've burned shops, chased people through the streets, and even killed a rapper they thought was supporting immigrants. And here's a huge eye-opener. During the refugee crisis, African migrants were treated far worse than Syrian or Middle Eastern refugees. While many were given asylum, black refugees were shoved into overcrowded camps, denied proper food, and physically abused by authorities. Even humanitarian groups reported that black refugees were treated as less than human. Thinking of going to Greece for a vacation? Maybe the islands are nice, but step off the tourist path, and the experience can quickly turn into a nightmare. Before we move forward, subscribe so we can keep bringing you this eye-opening content. You'd be shocked by the next country. It's one of the richest nations on earth. Yet black people face some of the worst treatment here. Stay tuned. Number 4. Saudi Arabia. If you think extreme racism is a thing of the past, just wait until you hear what happens in Saudi Arabia. You'd be shocked at how black people, especially those from Africa, are treated in this oil-rich kingdom. Ever heard of the phrase kafil system? It's a sponsorship program that basically allows employers to control foreign workers' lives. And guess what? It has led to modern-day slavery, particularly for black workers from Ethiopia, Sudan, and Nigeria. Domestic workers have reported being locked in houses, beaten, and even denied their salaries for months or years. Some have been killed, and their employers faced little to no punishment. In 2020, horrifying videos surfaced of African workers abandoned in filthy detention centers with no food, no water, and diseases running rampant. Their crime? Simply existing in Saudi Arabia without proper papers. And here's something even crazier. If you're black and Muslim, you'd think you'd be treated with respect in the birthplace of Islam. But even here, black Muslims face deep-rooted racism. Saudi Arabians often refer to black people using offensive racial slurs, and black pilgrims on Hajj have reported being denied service, overcharged, or treated like second-class believers. Ever seen a Saudi royal who is black? Exactly. The country's power structure excludes black people entirely, despite many having lived there for generations. Even those born in Saudi Arabia can never become citizens if they are of African descent. Meanwhile, white European and Arab immigrants, they get fast-tracked for citizenship. Saudi Arabia may be one of the wealthiest countries on earth, but for black people, it's one of the most brutal and unwelcoming places you can imagine. Number 3. South Korea. When people think of South Korea, they imagine K-pop, high-tech cities, and delicious food. But guess what? If you're black, your experience here could be shocking in the worst way possible. First things first, Koreans are obsessed with pale skin. Walk into any store and you'll see hundreds of skin whitening products. If that's not a sign of how black skin is perceived, wait until you hear the rest. Racism in South Korea isn't always violent. It's subtle but deeply ingrained. Black people, especially black foreigners, have been denied jobs, turned away from clubs, and even banned from renting apartments. Some landlords straight up refuse to rent to black people, believing they are unclean or dangerous. And if you think it's just a few people, let's talk about South Korean media. Ever noticed how blackface is still alive and well on Korean TV? Major comedians and entertainers have painted their faces black and acted like clowns, with zero consequences. Meanwhile, K-pop idols casually use the N-word, wear dreadlocks, and mock black culture. But when called out, they either ignore it or pretend they didn't know. Ever heard of Sam Okier? He's a Ghanaian TV personality who became famous in Korea, but when he spoke out against racism, his career was destroyed overnight. He went from a fan favorite to being blacklisted and harassed just for pointing out what every black person in Korea already knew. But here's where it gets worse. If you're black and trying to date in Korea, good luck. Studies show Koreans rank black people as the least desirable partners, and many won't even sit next to a black person on the subway. Some people will literally change seats just to avoid being near a black person. Korea may be modern and developed, but its attitude toward black people, stuck in the past. Before we move forward, hit that subscribe button so we can keep exposing these shocking truths. The next country might surprise you. It's one of the most technologically advanced nations in the world, but its treatment of black people is far from futuristic. Stay tuned. Number 2. Japan. If you think Japan is all about futuristic cities, anime, and polite people, wait until you hear how black people are treated here. You'd be shocked. Japan has a reputation for being one of the safest and most advanced countries in the world, but for black people, it can feel like an exclusive club where you're always the outsider. Unlike other countries on this list, Japan's racism isn't aggressive, it's more like being constantly reminded that you don't belong. Ever walked into a store and felt like you were being watched? In Japan, black people report being followed around in shops as if they're criminals. Some have even been denied entry to bars, clubs, and apartments simply because of their skin color. And guess what? There are actual businesses with signs that say, "No foreigners allowed." And if you think it's just about foreigners, think again. Even black people born and raised in Japan face discrimination. Ever heard of Ariana Miyamoto? She won Miss Japan in 2015. But because she was half black, many Japanese people said she wasn't Japanese enough. Imagine winning a national beauty pageant and people telling you that you don't even belong in your own country. But here's where it gets even crazier. Japanese media has no problem mocking black people. Blackface is still used in comedy shows, and major brands have released advertisements where actors wear exaggerated tribal outfits to depict black people as primitive. And when called out, they act like they don't understand what's wrong. But let's talk about something even deeper: how black people are treated in the workplace. Many foreign workers come to Japan as English teachers, but black teachers report getting paid less than their white counterparts. Some parents even request that their kids be taught by a white teacher instead of a black one, claiming they want someone who really speaks English. Dating in Japan as a black person? Good luck. Studies show that black people are the least preferred when it comes to relationships. Some Japanese women openly say they wouldn't date a black man because they think they're scary or dangerous. Where do they get these ideas? Hollywood movies, anime, and stereotypes from Western media. So while Japan might be one of the safest countries in the world, for black people, it's far from the most welcoming. Number 1, Iraq. You might think racism is bad in some countries, but wait until you hear about Iraq. This Middle Eastern nation has a dark history when it comes to black people, and you won't believe what's still happening today. First, let's talk about numbers. Did you know there are over 1.5 million black Iraqis? Most of them are descendants of African slaves who were brought to Iraq centuries ago. But here's the shocking part: they're still treated as second-class citizens today. Black Iraqis are often called ABD, which literally means slave in Arabic. Imagine being born in a country, growing up there, speaking the language, and still being called a slave just because of your skin color. But it doesn't stop there. Black Iraqis can't hold political office, struggle to get good jobs, and are constantly discriminated against in education and housing. Some of them still live in segregated communities because Iraqis refuse to accept them as equals. And guess what? Marrying a black person is considered shameful. Many black Iraqis find it almost impossible to marry into an Arab family because of their skin color. And if you think that's the worst of it, just wait. In 2008, black Iraqis tried to fight for their rights. They launched a movement to gain representation in the government, asking for just one seat in Iraq's parliament. You'd think that would be an easy request, right? Nope. Their demands were completely ignored. Meanwhile, the media plays a huge role in keeping racism alive. Black Iraqis are almost never shown on TV, and when they are, they're portrayed as servants, beggars, or criminals. Some even say Iraqis don't consider them real Iraqis, even though their ancestors have been in the country for over 1,000 years. So while Iraq might be rich in oil and history, its treatment of black people is stuck in the past. The truth is, racism isn't just an issue in one country, it's everywhere. Some places are just better at hiding it than others. From modern-day slavery in Saudi Arabia to black people being called slaves in Iraq, the reality is shocking. Even in high-tech nations like Japan and South Korea, deep-seated prejudice makes life difficult for black residents. So what does this mean for black travelers, students, and expats? It means doing your research, knowing your rights, and being prepared for the challenges ahead. But most importantly, it means calling out discrimination wherever it happens. If this video opened your eyes, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you the truth. And let us know in the comments, which of these countries surprised you the most? Let's get the conversation started.